How many of you here for the first time? A few of you. Okay, welcome. Let me tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to talk for a little while, and then what we do at the end of that is we have a Q&A time, and you can raise your hand and ask a question if you would like. For those of you who haven't been here for the whole series, let me take a couple of minutes and tell you what we're doing. We are about a little past halfway through, I guess. What number is this tonight? This would be number 6. Okay, so 6 out of 9 would be more than half. We are talking about 9 things you simply must do to succeed in love and life, and a little bit of the background of what this is. I am a psychologist, and so most of the stuff that psychologists talk about is like the problems of life, right? How dysfunctional we can be, and finding new ways to be screwed up, and getting better at those. And just, all the depressions and the anxieties and all the things that make life interesting. But that's not all of life. And if we begin to remember that all of life is not about our problems, but there's another half of life as well, and that's about, getting what you desire and reaching your goals and making relationships work and all that sort of stuff, then we need to look at that. And so what I did was, for a number of years, because I do a lot of leadership consulting and coaching and stuff like that in the corporate arena, I get to watch a lot of really successful people, both in work, in the way they work and build companies and organizations, as well as in relationships and those who build good marriages and families, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I went on this little project a number of years back, and for a long time, I just watched them. And I watched people who do really, really well to see what they had in common, and if there was a set of things that people who do well all tend to do. And that's what this book is about, and that's what this series is about. So we are getting tonight to principle number 6 of the 9 and principle number 7, and we'll hop into it, okay? Principle number 6 is called hate well. Hate well, which means do a good job at hating. Now, does that sound like a formula for success? Maybe if you're a gang member, right? But actually, I mean this. I wasn't kidding when I said hate well, because what I noticed, and as I did more research and study, was basically that this is just true. That the people who do well in their relationships and in reaching their goals and dreams are people who tend to hate, number 1, they do hate, and number 2, they do a really good job at it. They hate well. And conversely, the people who don't get what they want out of life and tend to repeat the same old things over and over in patterns and don't succeed in relationships and the rest of life hate as well. They hate too. But they don't hate as well as the people who hate well. I shouldn't have said they hate as well. I should have said they hate also. But they hate poorly. You understand what I mean? So, what have you figured out in the math so far? How many people hate? Everybody. Okay, turn to the person that you brought tonight and say, I hate. Can you do that? What does that feel like? You guys are going, oh, that felt good. I want to do that some more. Let me ask you this. When I say that if I said, you know what? You're a really hateful person. You hate. What comes to mind? Like, what do you feel if you think about you as hating? What? Bad. You feel bad. What else? Like you shouldn't. Rejection. Like it brings rejection or causes rejection. Control. Well, we like control, right? Feel guilty. No happy talk? How many of you got up this morning and said, okay, I am going to hate well today? See, we don't really think about that. But the reality is, and this is kind of the bottom line, a lot of whether or not you will succeed relationally and functionally in life does depend on how well you hate. And yet when we think about hatred, we tend to get that sort of like response. It's got kind of a negative valence to it, right? We feel guilty or we feel bad. A lot of people actually try to avoid feelings of hatred altogether. Now, if you've got your outline with you, I want to walk through some of this, and hopefully it'll begin to make a little more sense. The first one says, why we hate. Why we hate to begin with. I was doing a business deal one time. Actually, I had a new partner in a company that I own, and I did not know him, but I knew of his reputation. And his reputation was really sort of incredible as a superstar in business and leadership. What he had done was kind of started from nothing and bought a company and sold it for over $500 million in just a short amount of time. I mean, and he's a Christian leader and just a really, really competent guy. And my publisher had referred him to me for this thing that we were working on, and so we became partners. And what happened was when he was getting into the deal, first thing I was impressed by was his due diligence. I mean, he really did his homework, and he went through everything, and he talked to people, and it took him, a while to make a decision. But after he made a decision, he was fully into it. And what happened was we had been in this thing about 2 or 3 weeks, and I got a call that he would like to meet, and he would like to meet with me and the other people involved, and he didn't say what it was about, but he just wanted to have a meeting. So we set up this meeting, and we sit down. Have you ever been in one of those meetings where you know it's not a happy time? Before anybody really talks, and you could kind of tell. I mean, he wasn't being weird or anything, but you could tell this was not like, we didn't celebrate enough when we signed the papers. We need to celebrate more. It wasn't that kind of mood. And here's what he said. He said, let me tell you something about me. He said, I do not mind problems in the least. He said, in fact, I love problems. He said, business is about problems. I love solving problems. It's part of it. Some problems are harder than others. Some problems are really not fun problems to go through, but that's what it's about. And he said, I don't mind problems. He said, so don't get me wrong when I tell you that something is bugging me. It's not about that there's a problem. That's not what it is. I don't mind problems. He said, but I'm going to tell you something. I hate surprises. I said, surprises? What do you mean? He said, I hate surprises. I said, what kind of surprises? And then he pulled out some documents. And what had happened was our accountant had, in the sale of, from a previous partner into getting him into the company, the accountant had omitted some stuff. It wasn't like huge things, but it was significant enough to get your attention. And he had just forgotten about it, and it had to do with some kind of complicated debt sort of stuff. But it wasn't huge, but it was significant. And the accountant had forgotten about it and didn't include it in all the stuff that the guy went through in his due diligence. And so he becomes a partner, he buys in, and he's there, and then he finds out that there's a problem. And he said, I don't mind that there's a problem, but I hate surprises. Meaning, why wasn't I told this? Now is not the time for me to find this out. And he said, and I would have still done the deal had I found out before. He said, that's not the issue. The issue is that I was surprised. So we started talking about it, and I looked at it and I go, well, I don't know. So I called the accountant, and I began to kind of figure it out. And what happened was it was just a normal sort of kind of, nobody thought of it. It was lingering and it was back there, and nobody thought of it as a pretty innocent mistake. And once we worked through that, we got through it, and it wasn't a big deal. But I got to tell you something. In that meeting, I am falling in love. I mean, I love this guy. I'm going, this is going to be one of the best partnerships that I have ever been in. And the reason is because I'm working backwards from what he's saying. And he says, I hate surprises. So if he hates surprises, what does he love? He loves full disclosure. He loves people being honest. He loves knowing everything. He doesn't mind if it's negative. He just doesn't want there to be anything in the relationship or the business that's not disclosed. In other words, what he likes is for everything to be in the light. And I'm thinking, awesome. Awesome. Because furthermore, if that's what he loves, and here's where you start to fall in love with people like this and want to do more deals, if he hates things hidden and he loves things in the light, and here's the kicker, then what can I expect from him? Honesty. I can expect, because he has, and it's a little bit akin or the cousin to what we talked about pull the tooth the second week or second week. He has an immune system towards anything hidden or duplicitous or less than honest. His immune system is going to fire because that's in his DNA, one of the things that he hates. Therefore, when something like that comes across the transom or over the threshold or into the room or into his life, what he hates is an active force that moves against that. And when that's true, the reason we hate, back to the point, why we hate, the reason we hate is because you are designed in God's image to love good and to hate evil. And the reason why we hate is this, and you can write this down. You are defined in part by what you hate. Who you are is in part what you love, because what you love, you are going to gravitate towards, you are going to invest in, you're going to give yourself to, you're going to grasp, you're going to cling to, you're going to take in, you're going to ingest, you're going to grow, you're going to become more of the things that you love. And what you hate is that which, and this is where the psychological kind of developmental part of it comes in, what you hate is what you differentiate from. In other words, when we hate, it's sort of like if you're a boat on a dock, it's kind of like you untie it and then you push away from the dock and you're moving away from it, and the boat says, I am not the dock, I'm separate from the dock. Well, that's what the hatred does in our makeup. It differentiates us from that which we are not. Okay? So what he was telling me when he said, I hate surprises, what he was telling me is, I am not surprises. I am in the light. I'm honest. Now, the reason we hate is exactly that, because God has designed us to form an identity around the things that we love and the things that we hate. As the Bible says, love that which is good, cling to that which is good, and abhor or hate that which is evil. So, we can tell a lot about a person, we can tell a tremendous amount about a person by what they hate. Let me ask you a question. If I told you that I had somebody I want you to meet, okay? And this would be like I had some glasses here somewhere. Are they on my head? Aha. The younger I get, the more I need these. Ha, 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 ha. Okay. I got a new person I want you to meet, and you say, well, what's he like? And let's say who's single in here? Okay? Let's say that I'm going to set you up on a blind date. Okay? Or if you're married, I'm going to introduce you to a new friend. Okay? And you say, well, what are they like? And I say, well, there's a bunch of stuff about them. But let me give you a little bit. I can tell you a little bit about them. Somewhere. If I can find it. Here we go. Let me tell you what this person is like. Let me start with what they're not what they're not into, the things that they hate. Let me give you some examples. They really hate arrogance. They really don't like when people look down on other people. They like for people to be kind of, mutual, not self-deprecating or anything like that, but they hate like judgmental people. People with what the Bible calls haughty eyes. People that look down their nose at other people. And they really don't like lies. Anytime they run into a lie, it just bugs them because they really, really prefer for there to be a lot of honesty in their relationships. They don't like hands that shed innocent blood. In other words, they don't like people that pick on people. They don't like for innocent people to get hurt. They don't like a heart that devises wicked schemes. When somebody are, manipulative or thinking about how to go sideways in a relationship or hurt people. They don't like feet that are quick to rush into evil. In other words, they don't really like it when people just launch off into destructive things. And they don't like a false witness who pours out lies. They want people to speak the truth about each other instead of gossiping and slandering other people. And they really hate it when somebody stirs up dissension in a group. Like the kind of person in an office that's like goes and talks about somebody else, or the kind of person in a family or a circle of friends that kind of tries to get between people. Now, if I said, I want you to meet this person, and this is kind of what they're like, are you getting a picture that, gosh, this is a pretty cool person? Because they're not into divisiveness, and they're not into arrogance, and they're not into people hurting each other and stuff like this. They're pretty cool. Well, that's a description. It starts out by saying this: there are 6 things that the Lord hates. There are 7 that are detestable to him. And then it goes on, and it lists those things I just read to you. In other words, it's a picture of God. And when people ask you, well, what's God like? That's a pretty good description. He doesn't like when innocent people are hurt. If you want to know what the Christian values are, that's one of the list of values. Like that innocent people aren't hurt, and that people aren't arrogant and judge each other, and that people don't stir up dissension, and they don't go do destructive things, et cetera, et cetera. So you kind of get a picture of that. All right? So the reason I start with this is why we hate is you are going to be defined in part by what you hate, because it's what you are basically going to make sure doesn't get into your life and doesn't get into your relationships. Now, obviously, people can, launch bombs over the wall, and that happens. But see, when you have a good immune system based on your values, then that's a big deal. Okay, number 2, how we hate. So the first thing is what we hate. Successful people have a list of things or why they hate in order to define who they are. And the second one is how we hate. Now, we've already admitted that all of us hate, right? Even God hates. But how do we hate? Let me tell you a story. A couple came to see me one time. And I said, what's the problem? And she goes, well, I just can't deal with him anymore. And he's like sort of, rolling his eyes and sort of looking around and down like this. And you can tell he's kind of under this kind of oppressive sort of feeling. And I said, well, what's the problem? And she goes, well, he's so irresponsible. And I said, in what way? And she went on to, talk about some things that he had done, which were, real things. And he's sitting there and he's kind of nodding and this, that, and the other. And so I can't remember exactly what the whole list was, but I remember saying to her something like, so it sounds like, it's pretty disappointing when he doesn't follow through on some things. And she goes, disappointing? Disappointing? That's what you call it? And as she's talking, I said, well, what would you call it? And she said, well, I would call it out. I don't remember the word she said, but I'm telling you, as this woman is talking, her face is like, when the movie channels after 11, the menu changes and the horror films start to come on and all this sort of stuff. I mean, she is changing. I didn't even know that a face could get that contorted, that I mean, she's just you could just feel the toxicity and the contempt. And it was just gross. And I'm sitting there wishing I had a wetsuit on. Like, I feel like these just fumes and stuff of contempt are coming at me. And basically, I made a shift at that point in seeing them from realizing, or I began to realize, or I made a shift from thinking that the problem was how do they get his unstructured life to be more responsible to where he could meet her needs, to the first thing that had to be dealt with was the poisonous, toxic contempt that this woman had for his failure. Now, again, the man was failing her, okay? But here's the point. Successful people get failed against all the time because they work with humans and they marry humans, smart ones. So she wasn't unique in that somebody let her down. She was different than my business partner when somebody let him down. Not that they had differences. See, I mean, this is a good value. She had something good to hate. She should stand up against irresponsibility. But the manner in which she hated, how she hated, was not going to help him get better. And it hadn't. Not only was it not going to help him to get better, it was going to make it worse. Okay? And what was happening was she didn't see that the venom and the bitterness and the grossness and the fumes, I mean, I would rather just suck on bus fumes all day long, I'm serious, than be around her for 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, how does this guy live with it? And I'm feeling sorry for the screw up. Right? And he's the one that's really screwing things up. She was, other than her, toxicity, she wasn't really failing the relationship. But what had happened was he was dying underneath it, and their kids were dying underneath it because they got the same treatment. So here's the trick. We all hate because we are wired, God has hardwired you to stand up against things that are hurtful. Okay? That's in your DNA. A baby does it. Give a baby sour milk and you'll see hatred. Okay? That's what they do. But some people don't hate purely like that. They've kind of got value-added hatred. They've added a lot of toxin to it. So the second point is not why we hate or what we hate, but that we can hate poorly in the way that we hate. Now, let me make a distinction here, and this is something I want you to think about as a guiding principle. Here's the difference between hating well and hating poorly in how we hate. Okay? First of all, we said everybody hates. And secondly, we talked about it's important what we hate, which we'll spend some more time on in a moment. But this how we hate is very, very understandable in terms of what's good and what's not. Bad hatred, or hatred that will, and I promise you this is true, hatred that will absolutely get you less of what you desire in life is something called subjective hatred. Subjective hatred. And hatred that will ensure practically that you get what you desire in life is something called objective hatred. Objective. So there's subjective and objective. Subjective hatred is basically when we are walking around with subjective, in other words, they're just our own feelings. There's no object really that's very focused. Our feelings are very subjective when things go wrong, and basically we're just walking around with a pool of it, inside. And what happens is we've kind of got this toxic hatred inside that's very subjective, and it's from long ago, a lot of it, and it's from our own character, and we're just kind of walking around with it. And then anything can set us off. Now, how many of you have ever been in a relationship with somebody with subjective hatred? So what happens is you cut them off on the freeway, and the toxins and the rage and the how could you do this? I mean, all you did was like not get out of the lane fast enough, and you have ruined this person's life. Now, let me ask you something. Somebody with that kind of subjective hatred, where a little spilled milk can bring forth nuclear toxins, how big of a life is that? It's not a very big life. And some people have a toggle switch. Everybody know what that is? A toggle switch is on or off. They don't even have like a ramp up. You know, they're either fine or they are enraged. And see, that's not what successful people do. Successful people don't walk around with this subjective pool of hatred that can come out and fly at people and this, that, and the other over any kind of infraction. In fact, what they do is they take their subjective feelings of hatred or their feelings of hatred or anger or whatever the emotion is, and emotion has very little to do with this because emotion really doesn't solve problems. What they do is they use their anger and they use their, fight or flight kind of feelings, and they take those subjective feelings and they become very objective about them. In other words, they can name what the problem is. They can find the source of the problem. There's an object here. There's a person. And there is an object or a dynamic. There's a specific thing that's happening. There's a time. There's a place. There's a space. See, all of these objective realities that we can see, feel, touch, understand, what they do is they take their subjective feelings and they make them very objective towards solving a problem. And that's the difference in how people hate, who hate well and those who don't. Now, my friend had a very strong reaction to the accountant's non-disclosure. But think about this. He could have walked into that meeting and been exactly like the woman in the marriage counseling. He could have spewed toxins. He could have called everybody irresponsible. He could have called them crooks and duplicitous. And how dare you not to... And it could have just started down this thing. And instead, now get this. Instead, and this would have been roughly, I'm going to guess, 1998 or 99 when this happened. He's bugged and he hates it and he comes in and he presents his hatred there. And that was in 98 or 99. And since that time, what's that, 6 years ago, we have done increasingly more and more and more deals together. Because, now get this, the same kind of problem that was breaking up a marriage cemented a business relationship. Same problem, different ability in the offended party to handle an infraction. And I just was rolling the tape back in my head of this couple of what if she had been able to objectively deal with her husband's weakness and her husband's failure instead of spewing that toxin for all those years. Where would they be? See, she would have lifted him potentially to a higher place. So it's not only that we hate and why we hate and what we hate, but how we hate is a big deal. In fact, Jesus said, it's really interesting. When he talked about anger, he said, you've heard it said, that you shouldn't murder. And he said, well, I'll tell you, anybody that's been angry with his brother, and there's a little phrase in there because it's implied in the Greek, and you have to look in the margin of your Bible. It says, anyone who's been angry with his brother, and the phrase is without cause, is, in trouble. And he goes on to sort of, give different gradients about it. He says if you're angry, then you're going to go before the judge. So if we're angry with people for no reason, what does that mean? It means that we're walking around with the stuff that we need to be judged for, right? The road rager is going to be judged for that rage that he's bringing to that incident. And then he says, if we scream at somebody, he says that we are even going to be disciplined for that. In other words, now our subjective hatred has gone past something we're carrying around, and now we're beginning to cast insults and scream at people and get mad. And he says that God is going to begin to set limits on us when we do that. And you see this happen. It's no accident like when people get fired, or people break up with them, or friends begin to go away. Sometimes, as the Bible says, that's reality consequences, and sometimes that's God's discipline in somebody's life. And if we're walking around with subjective hatred and spewing that all over people, we will run into non-success. Okay? Now get this. Then he goes on to say further. He says, and if anybody says, you fool, which means if we go to name-calling of other people without cause, he says that we'll be guilty enough to go into the hell fire. Now, why would he say that? If you're bugged for no reason, you get a little sort of, reprimand. If you start to get mad and act that out, you get further. But if you start to name call, he says you're in danger of really falling off the cliff here. And here's the reason. Because when we are name calling for no reason and attacking people, what that means is that we've started to project. In other words, I'm calling somebody a fool and I'm the one that's out of control. What that means is I am no longer owning my own problems. And it's only the people that don't own their own problems that fall off the cliff. And that's why I believe he says you'll be guilty enough to, be close to the hellfire. Because who goes to the hellfire? The people that say, I'm perfect, there's nothing wrong with me. It's these fools in my life. See, those are the subjective kinds of haters. All right? So when we take ownership and then begin to work it out, it's a different story. And that brings us to the next point, which says transforming hate, which means that we begin to move it from subjective hatred to objective hatred. So we take our feelings and we begin to realize, okay, part of this is me. Part of this is something I'm bringing to the situation from long ago. And part of it is the other person. But how I handle it is going to mean everything. So instead of going from global, we go to specific. Instead of saying, you're so irresponsible, we say, look, Joe, there's a problem here that we need to solve. See the difference? So we get rid of the all or nothing spewing, and we go to solve specific kinds of problems. Another phrase that I like in talking about stuff like this, you've heard me probably say it before, is a friend of mine who's a leader, and he says, I try to go hard on the issue and soft on the person. Hard on the issue and soft on the person. And I remember, in that meeting example that I was talking about, the guy was immovable about the issue. He's going, look, I just don't do surprises. But he wasn't beating anybody up. Nobody felt put down or condemned or, ashamed or anything like that. But we knew he was serious about that, and that was a good thing. So hard on the issue and soft on the person. And I remember another sort of one of these really high achiever types that I was interviewing for the book and studying. I was specifically asking him about this issue, and he said, early on in my career, he said, you just run into a bunch of psychos, bosses and upper management and stuff like this. And he eventually became the president of a public company himself. And he said, early on, though, I figured out that if I was going to get to the top, I made a commitment that I would never allow someone's meanness, toxicity, I don't know what word to use, never allow that to get me off track. But what I would do is when they were like that, what I would see that as was a signal. If it was a boss, I would see that as a signal. They've got a problem, and what can I do to go try to solve the problem? See, that's an objective kind of hatred. He hates the situation. He hates what's going on, but he's going to make objective moves to try to fix it. Now, compare that with what if somebody is walking around into a corporation, okay? And this is a guy that became president of one of the big three networks. I mean, big company, right? What if he had started out in that company and he had come in with a subjective pool of hatred for authority? The first time a boss does something weird or toxic or mean, what's he going to do? He's going to go off on this authority figure. Have you ever had anybody work for you? How many of you have people report to you or that you manage in some way? Have you ever had anybody with an authority problem? What's it like? See, they're coming to the table with road rage. And what is their life like? They have one problem after another. See, that's the subjective pool. So part of transforming it is also realizing that I may be walking around with a lot of subjective stuff from the past that doesn't even fit this situation, and I've got to get in a different mindset, which means that when things happen, even if it's with authority figures that I don't like, that I hate, that I'm going to objectively solve the problem instead of subjectively begin to punish them for everything that everybody's ever done to me. Okay? And then the next one, number 4, assessing hate. Assessing hate. Have you ever asked yourself what you hate? If I said to you, give me, we just said the 6 things, the 7 things that God hates. If I said, Mary, give me the 7 things that you hate, could you do that? On the spot. Could you come up with, would it just come out of you kind of naturally? Some of you could. Others of you might have to say, well, I don't know. Let me see what happens to me tomorrow. Let me tell you how this new relationship goes or something like that. In other words, you've never really thought of it. You've never thought of it. But let me show you what happens when you thought of it, when you have thought of it specifically. Here's an example of somebody who thinks about it. I'm going to read a psalm that David wrote, and then I'm going to read you a paraphrase of this that I wrote out of the book that sort of puts it into modern day life. Here's what he says. The deeds of... Let me start before that. He says, I will set before my eyes no vile thing. The deeds of faithless men I hate. They will not cling to me. Men of perverse heart shall be far from me. I will have nothing to do with evil. Whoever slanders his neighbors in secret, him I will put to silence. Whoever has haughty eyes and a proud heart, there's that word again, him I will not endure. And my eyes, he says, will be on the faithful of the land, that they may dwell with me, and he whose walk is blameless will minister to me. In other words, he's going to pick safe people, good people. No one who practices deceit will dwell in my house, period. No one who speaks falsely will stand in my presence. Every morning I'll put to silence all the wicked in the land and cut off every evildoer from the city of the Lord. Now, here's David, and he's saying, basically, here's my DNA. You want to know who I am? You want to know what kind of relationships? You want to know what kind of business deals I want to do? Here's what I won't put up with. And he just lays it out there. Now, let me ask you a question. What would your life be like? Pick an age, 18 or so. Starting at 18, if you drew a line to your current age, now I know that's only 6 or 8 years for most of you. Okay, if you drew a line from age, let's take it back further because you're really kind of, making choices at about 15 or 16. If we took from 15 or 16 to your current age now, and you had followed your hatred in David's way. Okay? If you had been defined by your hatred in a good way from age 15 until today, and this is a paraphrase of what I just read to you, and this had been true of you, ask yourself, would your relational life have been any different? And would your career and business life have been any different? Whenever I see destructive behavior, I'm going to leave that situation. I won't trust people who are betrayers, so I won't be walking around with a lot of hurt. I'll stay away from people who twist good things, such as love or sex, and use them against me in some impure way. I won't play that game. I don't want to be close to those who are slanderers and put other people down. And those arrogant types who think they're so superior and try to put me down can just stay away. I want to be around good people with good hearts and spend my time with them. I want to receive what they have to offer. I won't be around liars and people who are not into the truth. That's just I took the words of Psalm 101 and just wrote them in the way that we think today. Now, would that line look any different if you had held to those values? Well, what's keeping your hatred from doing that for you? Because basically, people who have that kind of hatred, they don't get mad much. They say, no, I don't want to do that. People that get mad are the ones, like Proverbs says, the angry man's like a city without walls. See, that's a person without objective hatred. They can't move against problems. And then the last one says, doing better is to be reminded that you get what you tolerate. So let me give you a couple of tips and then we'll move on. Number one, make your values intentional. Go on it sounds sort of elementary school, but go on a values clarification trip. Think about this for a while. Pray about this. Look at the Bible. Look at your past. The most hurtful situations probably in part happen because your hatred didn't move quickly enough. And your hatred is going to be built around your values, what you love and what you hate. So make your values intentional. Number two, build your immune system. How many of you take food supplements to build your immune system? Why is that? Why do you do that? Because you've noticed that when your immune system is down, the toxins can take over your body, right? Well, your emotional, psychological immune system is the same way, and you've got to build it up. So you've got to get more able. You have to have more resistance. So what that means is you've got to get more love in your life, and you've got to get stronger, and you've got to get this stuff out of you that's wearing down your immune system, which is like the old hurts and things like that, which make you weak. And you need a lot more love. You need a lot more care. You need a lot more validation. Then thirdly, deal with the subjective hatred that you're walking around with and make it objective by naming the time, giving it space. In other words, being able to name the specific instance. Say, Joe, look, here's what's going on. On Thursday, this happened, and I don't like that. That's different than subjectively spewing at people. Time and space, and begin to understand it, even the past stuff. When you understand things, even the ways that you might have been abused, and you're understanding what happened to you, and you're getting meaning from it, and you're learning, and you're not going to repeat it, and all of that does a lot to get rid of subjective hatred, as well as adding forgiveness to that. And then process the specific feelings and name the places. Where did this happen to you? How did it happen? And when you do that, then you're going to get the subjective stuff out of it. And then add love to it. When you go stand against something, go hard on the issue but soft on the person. The more you get enraged and attack somebody when something bad is happening, the less you are effective you are at solving the problem, and all you're doing is becoming, as we'll see in a moment, dependent upon them. But if you're loving and hard on the issue, then you're not dependent. You've stayed clear and clean. And then the last one is build your skills. Build your skills. Which means you got to be assertive. You got to learn communication. You got to learn how to, say no. You've got to learn how to have good conflict resolution and be direct and be loving. Okay? So, how many people in here hate? Okay? How many of you hate better now than you did 20 minutes ago? Okay, good job. All right.